Welcome to the Recovery Effect Podcast with Bill Vineyard. Recovery is Bill's passion and his life's work of 30 plus years. Now it's your turn to experience the Recovery Effect, a powerful mix of recovery, spirituality, philosophy, and most importantly, living life as your true self. Now here's your host, Bill Vineyard.
Hey, all you Recovery Effect Podcast listeners out there. Hey, how'd you like that? That was my best ever DJ voice. Now I'm really blushing and embarrassed because that was kind of stupid. So you want to hear that one again. So if you're looking for a really good DJ voice from Billy V, you are out of luck. Before we get into this podcast, I'd like to mention a couple of things. One is that if you haven't subscribed to the recoveryeffects.com webpage, would you please do it? And would you also check out how great that webpage looks? I got a brand new website, thanks to Andrew, who owns Done For You Tech, who is the best website builder in the United States. So if anybody needs a website for a really good price, this is the man to see. The other thing I want to bring up is that if you get a chance, you should listen to the Powerless podcast I made. As a matter of fact, I think it's the first podcast I came out with. I've revised it a lot, so it's a lot smoother, but you should listen to that if you can, because it would help you understand what we're ready to get into here in a lot deeper way. There's a Bible verse I'd like to start this out with. It really fits in well with what we're doing here. It says in Matthew 5:25, it says, "Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guards, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny." I've always wondered what that meant, and I think I've kind of got it figured out, and I want to share it with you today, because what I think it means in regards to our case, in regards to our alcoholism and drug addiction, and by the way, if you're not an alcoholic or a drug addict, I really think you can get something out of this if you just try to look for the similarities instead of the differences. Anyway, let's get back to the task at hand. When I reinterpret that and use it for the alcohol and drug addict, my interpretation would be like this. Agree with your conscience quickly while you're on the way to the liquor store or the drug dealer, because at any time the drugs will deliver you to the jailer and you will be put into prison. Truly, I'm telling you guys, you will not come out until you have done all your time. I think they both mean the same. They're talking about our conscience, that internal voice that tells us what's best for us and what's not best for us. You know, agree with it quickly. Do what it tells you to do quickly, because if you don't, you're going to end up in trouble. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to jail. It could be a divorce, loss of job, all kinds of other crazy stuff that happens to us when we don't listen. In this case, your conscience is the accuser. It's trying to tell you not to do what you're getting ready to do. So this scenario here that I'm telling you is really the internal state of an alcoholic and drug addict. Here it is. The demands of the addiction versus sobriety or morality. And I call sobriety morality in this case because the moral thing for an alcoholic and drug addict to do is to stay sober and clean. So it would be immoral to drink or drug. So what happens then is this overpowering desire comes upon us, and it's all we think about. It consumes us. As the big book says, it makes us irritable, restless, and discontent. It's a miserable state to live in when this thing is on you like that, and you know what I'm talking about. And what it does then is it leads us to believe that the only choice available to us is to drink. And it says that would be the most pleasurable thing to do. That's insane. We know how insane that is. I've talked to people, numerous people, hundreds of people, that have told me that their drinking and drug use hasn't been pleasant for the past 10, 15 years, but yet they're still doing it. But somehow, some way, this disease tells us, man, this is the only way out. I got to be satisfied or I'm going to torture you to death. The most pleasant thing to do would be to drink and drug, so we go do it. Why? Because we don't have any choice. And you'll have to listen to that Powerless podcast to figure that one out, why we don't have a choice. But getting back to this, is this unbearable conflict starts when we consider using to satisfy that desire for alcohol or drugs. Because when we start thinking about using, what happens? That conscience presents itself. It presents the moral issue and tries to convince you not to use. It tells you, didn't you promise your wife or your kids or your parents? Didn't you make a promise to your boss that you'd never touch another drop of liquor or smoke any more dope or do any more drugs from now on, that you're done with it? And by the way, you could end up in jail. How about your family then? They won't be able to keep the house. You could even go to prison. I mean, you've already got 3 DUIs. They could put you in prison for this. So when that conscience starts talking to you, it gets in a terrible war with that desire to use. And the moment that desire enters your mind, that conscience pops up. It goes, hey, wait a minute. Let's talk about this. And you go, oh my God, where did you come from? Thus starts this age-old battle between what we want and what we ought to do. It's want against ought. Of course, the want to drink or drug provides us with a justification to use. But there's no justification for drinking or drugging. There's no justification for disobeying the moral mandate to not use. I mean, there are certain justifications for breaking a moral law. If you wake up in the night and your daughter's screaming and you break into her door and there's a man in there with a gun trying to rape and kill her and you shoot him, well, that's a moral justification for breaking the moral mandate to not kill. But there is no type of justification for an alcoholic or drug addict to use. Of course, the right thing to do would be to obey the ought to not drink mandate. But our inability and lack of power to make that choice puts us in a very, very painful situation. Because once we violate that moral mandate to drink or not to drink, guilt and fear and anger and pain just flow in and torture us day and night. I've had alcoholics tell me that when they relapsed, they felt guilty before the drink hit their stomach. I mean, it's that quick. All them negative, torturing emotions just grab a hold of you and just torture you because you went against your conscience and submitted to the want to drink. As this type of scenario continues to persist, the 4 horsemen show up. The 4 horsemen dressed in pure black. Their terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. They eventually become our closest companions. We exist in that state, and we wonder why we're not happy, because we're being tortured by all them emotions. And those 4 horsemen continue to be with us day and night. I used to wake up in the morning and I'd look over there, and there's those 4 sitting in a chair. And they'd say something like, "Boy, Bill, I'm glad you're awake. We got a lot to go over." And I get up out of bed and go in the shower, and they're talking to me. "Man, do you know you got a payment coming up? You better get it paid. They've already warned you they're going to take your house." And despair would just lean on me so heavy, telling me all the rotten things that's going on in my life and how it's never going to change. They would just torture me day and night, whether I'm in my car, whether I'm at work, whether I'm at home. There was just no way of getting away from them. No one knows that internal hell like an alcoholic and an addict. They can't even imagine the torture chamber we exist in down there. And amazingly, and I say amazingly because I don't know how we put up with it for so long, this type of thing lasts for years, and we keep getting sicker and sicker and sicker. The Big Book says we get physically ill, mentally ill, and spiritually ill. We become so mentally deranged that the greatest delusion occurs, and that is that sobriety, which is the enemy of drinking and drugging, starts to take on a face that it's against us. Sobriety looks negative, restrictive, and suppressive. We think we're losing our freedom if we get sober and clean. The delusion continues to persist and tell us that using and drinking is freedom and that sobriety is imprisonment, when it's just the exact opposite of that. The alcohol and drug use is imprisonment. That's what captivates us and tortures us. I mean, you all know the drill. You got to get up, find your dope. You got to find the money for dope. By now, you probably can't work, so you're having to steal stuff. You're having to do stuff you don't want to do. You steal a lawnmower from your dad, things out of the house from your mom. You do anything it takes to get drunk or high. It's on your mind constantly. As a matter of fact, it is your main goal on a daily basis. You want to talk about imprisonment? I don't know of a person in a maximum security prison that's in any more imprisonment than that. But sobriety is freedom. The freedom to do what you want to do with your life because it isn't centered around using all the time. The freedom to work at what you want to work at, to be the kind of mother or father you want to be. You're free to be what you are because you're not controlled by this addiction. But the delusion continues to grow and grow until you can't even tell what's reality and what's not, what's false and what's true. What a terrible situation we're in. And why are things so crazy, so unmanageable? Because your will, which is the top dog here, is stronger and is the leader of your thinking, of your reasoning ability. It's like a big, big bully, and it goes up to your thinking and it says, look, I want you to feed back to me exactly what I want. If I want a car, I want you to justify how I should get a car. If I want a drink or drug, I want you to be able to justify and make sure that I'm able to get what I want. Therefore, the little thinking goes up against this big will and has to submit and do what it wants it to do. It says, okay, I'll think the way you want me to. So the will controls the thinking, the acting, and the whole scenario. The problem with this whole thing is that the will is very, very sick. It has been conquered and controlled by the addiction. This very sick but very powerful will does exactly what this addiction tells it to do. It can't escape this addiction. It's more powerful than the will, so the will has to do its bidding. So you can see the total hopeless situation we're in. The will is conquered by the addiction. The will controls the thinking, your reasoning ability. So your reasoning says okay to using, and the will orders the body to move, to go to the drug house, to go to the liquor store and get what it needs. And this goes on and on and on, year after year after year. In an odd kind of way, what makes matters worse is when all this is going on, when the will's doing what it does to the thinking, and the addiction's doing what it's doing to the will, and the addict and alcoholic is continuing to drink and drug, and his life is continuing to get worse and worse, what pops up? Your conscience. And even makes things harder by saying, you ought not to do that. But what can the alcoholic addict do? He can't obey those mandates from the conscience, but it just adds another level of torturous stress and anxiety. So the addict disobeys the conscience and uses, even though the addict admits that it's not the right thing to do and it's going to cause harm to me and all the loved ones I have. Because you know why? He can't listen to the conscience. Number one, he's powerless. He can't do what the conscience wants. But number two, if he doesn't use, he's going to stay in that state of misery till he does use, because that misery doesn't go away. Those cravings, that desires, that mental obsession with the physical cravings just drives him nuts until he finally throws his hands up in the air and says, okay, I'll drink. Okay, I'll drug. And then what happens? More guilt and everything else is compounded, so you're tortured more. But you know, in a way, the guilt and the torturous feelings is a good thing. It's trying to cause enough pain, enough emotional discomfort that you'll decide that you want to change. And the sad thing about that is you go get some help. The alcoholic or addict goes get some help, and they want to give him medication to help relieve him of the very pain, the very thing that's going to help him get sober. Incredible. Not only is the alcoholic and addict insane, but half of the people that's treating these people are insane. This cycle goes on and on and on. It doesn't stop. And we continue down that road until the gates of insanity or death. Things always get worse Never, never, never better. Until you reach a point, until this addict or alcoholic reaches a point to where they feel the only way out is to kill themselves. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the life, is the psychic existence, is the environment that the alcoholic and addict lives in. I cannot think of a better description of hell than that one right there. But thank God there is a way out. There is a way to a better way of life where you don't have to live like that. If the addict really realizes that his will is conquered and that his thinking is under the control of the will, then he realizes that he suffers from a mental obsession combined with an allergy of the body. In other words, he realizes he's powerless. He can't bring this thing under control. And if he can realize that on a deep level, then he can realize also that he needs a power greater than himself, and he can move to step 2. So he'll come to believe that there is a power greater than himself that can restore him to sanity. Once that happens, begin the process of fixing the will by making a decision in step 3 to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understand Him. I'm always amazed when people have a difficult time turning their life and will over to the care of God as they understand Him. They don't want to be possessed. They don't want to be out of control or not have a choice in the matter. I mean, they act like they're really giving God this really precious gift of their will and their life. I mean, look at this disease-infected, slimy will that's conquered by alcoholism and drug addiction. It can't do the right thing, even if it wants to. And this life that they're living that's totally possessed by this drug or alcohol that tells them to go do this, go steal this, go con this person, go do this. I mean, their life is totally a wreck. And they take these 2 items, life and will, and they say, hey, God, this is your lucky day, man. I'm going to turn these precious things over to you. I mean, it's not that we're giving him anything that's in that good a shape. Like selling a used car with no engine, flat tires, transmissions knocking. I mean, here, God, because I love you. You're so lucky. I'm turning this wrecked life over to you and this sick, sick will. Oh, and by the way, if you can improve it a little, would you do that? No, we need to make a decision, a really deep decision, that we're turning this life and will over to His care. And if we can do that, then we can move on to getting rid of all that guilt and fear and anxiety and all that other crazy stuff we're feeling that's torturing us to death day in and day out by doing a 4th and 5th step. And when we get done with that, we go to our sponsor or somebody that we can trust that will understand what we're doing, and we do the 6th and 7th step. We read it off to them and talk about it. And then we can say goodbye guilt, goodbye fear, because God removes those character defects. And the other character defects is selfishness, inconsiderate, and those things that's causing our problems. They're removed. And then we're feeling so good we want to keep on moving, and we move to steps 8 and 9 and make amends to the people we've harmed. We make right the wrongs that we've done. So therefore, when we finish step 9, look, we're right with God, we're right with ourselves, and we're right with the world. And I want to tell you something. That's about as good as you're ever going to get on this penal colony called Earth. And when we've completed down to step 9, we realize that we want to keep what we've got. We don't want to lose it. So we're going to do 10, 11, and 12 steps. We're going to continue to take a personal inventory, and when we're wrong, promptly admitted it. We're going to seek God. We're going to sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand Him. And when we do that, we're going to carry this message because we've had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We're now willing to give it away. What a beautiful way to live compared to the hell that we were in. It's a beautiful way to live whether you're in hell or not. But folks, we were in the bottom pits of hell. And now, when we finish and work in these steps, we are amazed. The Big Book said it right when it said we are reborn. We're not rehabilitated. We're not even the same person that was laying down there in the bottom of hell. We're excited about life. Our passion is back. We're able to do the right thing. We're able to set goals. And matter of fact, we're able to achieve some of them. So what do you think? Do you think the war ends after you quit drinking and work the program? I can assure you my war hadn't ended. I still have things that come up that I want, and my conscience comes up and says, you shouldn't do that. That war's still there. Of course, it's not like the drinking and drugging war was, but it's still there. I still have those battles to fight, and sometimes I lose those battles. Of course, the conscience continues to do its job. It continues to remind me that what I'm doing is wrong and I ought not to do that. And when I do that, I feel the guilt or the fear or the anger. But you see, this time I have a way of dealing with it because I've learned the process, and the process is all the same. I just have to keep practicing the process. When I get a resentment, I got to recognize my part. I got to tell my sponsor about it. I've got to ask God to forgive me and to remove the defect that caused my part. And then I got to make amends. I mean, it's the same process, and it works even after you've done your steps 1 through 9. You see, it's more like a life stance that we're taking. And that life stance is to love and to be kind and to do the right thing. And when something stands in the way of that, when something stands in the way of us doing the right things, we need to not move. Just don't move. Just refuse to do what's wrong, no matter what. Kind of like our drinking, see? We just refuse to take that drink. We refuse to give up our sobriety. And it's the same thing that we deal with after we've got the drink problem or the drug problem under control. There are times that it looks like we're going to get in hot water or it's going to cost us to do what's right, and it looks like it would be more beneficial if we would do what was wrong. But see, that's the same delusion we had back when we were drinking. That sobriety looked like it was putting you in captivity. Sobriety looked bad. Drinking and drugging looked good, looked like we had freedom, when in fact it was just the opposite. Well, that same process continues. There's times you want to do something wrong because it looks pleasurable, looks like you come out on top, and if you do what's right, it's going to cost you, and it might cost you. But you know what that's called? That's called sacrifice. Maybe you'd rather sit on your butt and watch basketball rather than go outside and playing with your children. It could be something that simple, and you don't do it, and you feel bad. You feel guilty after it's all said and done. Well, you have to follow the same process. Realize your part in it, ask God to forgive you, look at the character defect, which is selfishness, and then make amends to your children, even in matters that small and insignificant, which I don't consider that with your children that insignificant, but matters other than alcohol and drugs. What I'm trying to say is that no matter what, we have to do what's right. It always wins, always. You can never go wrong doing what's right. You just can't. And then you realize that happiness is the byproduct. It's what's left over after you do what's right. It was real enlightening for me to realize, well, first to realize the delusion that sobriety was captivity and imprisonment and all that, and that alcohol and drugs were freedom and all that. It was enlightening to realize I had it just the opposite. But what was equally enlightening was the fact that when I was going through life, especially when I was first sober, that to do the right thing was the right thing to do. It was enlightening to realize that if I do that, I was going to be happier doing that doing the right thing was the right thing. Two of the greatest problems I had in regards to that area of doing the right thing was, one, lying. I never really believed in the truth, and I had a really hard time believing that telling the truth was the right thing to do because it would bring on so much pain, or at least in my imagination I thought that. And I remember when I started telling the truth, I told the truth about little things, and I was shocked. It worked. And I got a little braver, and I started telling the truth about bigger things. And then pretty soon I got pretty good at telling the truth because it continued to work and work and work. And the other one, the second one, was that when I was mad at someone, if I was right in this resentment, I never felt the need to reconcile with that individual. I mean, even if I was totally innocent, it was still my responsibility to do all that I can to make sure that we can reconcile. That person's sitting over there with a resentment towards me, maybe, and of course, I've got a resentment towards him, but let's say he's 100% in the wrong. I still have the responsibility to try to help him get over that resentment. I remember reading in Not God, that book called Not God, and the author said that in his research, he learned that the best way to get an in-person interview with Bill Wilson was to somehow let him know that you had a resentment towards him. He would do everything in his power to help you get through that resentment because, you see, he felt that deep responsibility to do the right thing and to make that guy's life better. So why don't we try this? Why don't we do what the Big Book says, and faith without works is dead? We need action. This is a program of action. If you got a resentment, why don't you start praying for that person? Ask God to give that person everything you want. And do that. The Big Book says for a couple of weeks, but I say do it until the resentment is gone. That's a spiritual exercise you can do. My daughter used to give the guys an exercise of putting the carts that were in parking lots like at Walmart or the grocery store, putting them back into the cage where they go. And there's been some amazing results from that. Think about this for a minute. You get out of your car, there's a shopping cart there. You take that shopping cart, you push it over and put it in that little cage, and then you start to walk into the store. I bet you're going to feel better about doing that than you would if you wouldn't have done it. Now, I don't mean you're going to be ecstatic and jumping for joy, but you just feel better because that is the byproduct of doing the right thing. So an exercise that you might want to try is to put those carts back in there. Very unselfish exercise that actually helps people's cars from getting dented. And there's nothing in it for you. I hate to admit it, but I had a pretty big ego when I first got into the program. I know I was probably alone in that area, but I had a pretty big ego. My sponsor told me, he said, Bill, from now on, when you walk into a room with people or into a store, I want you to say to yourself, I'm the worst person in this building. And I thought, man, that's bad for your self-esteem. I'd read enough in psychology, and I was a psych major. I knew that wasn't healthy, but I did want to stay sober, so I did it. I'd go into a store or something, I'd say, I'm the worst person in here. And it really helped. It really did. But there was an experience in regards to that really stands out. I was out at Sam's one day with my wife, and we were shopping, and this guy turned the corner with his cart, and he had obviously been in a real severe fire. And his whole body was so distorted, so terrible looking. And when he turned the corner, I went, oh, man, I had to look away. And I'll be honest, and I hate myself for it, but I thought, man, that guy ought not be out in public. That's terrible. And then my sponsor's words came to me. And I said to myself, that man's a better man than I am. And as I continued walking, I was thinking about that. And I thought to myself, he is a better man than I am. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to do what he does. He refuses to stay home. He refuses to not be active because of his disability, if we can call it that. He's going to get the most out of his life no matter what. So you see, I realized that man was better than me. And that really helped with me gaining some small bits of humility, which was so hard for me to have in the first place. But those are all spiritual exercises that we can practice, that we can put into action. What's the use of knowing something if it's not put into action and you're actually doing it? What's really being asked of you is to just give back the love and kindness that's been given to you. Of all the people in the world, we should have no problem doing that because we exist today. We're alive today because of the love of God and the kindness of the AA members towards us. Us that are sober know that's the reason we're standing here alive. Why don't we just take what's been given to us and give it back? In closing, I would like to leave you with one of my best favorite quotes from the Big Book in the 4th edition on page 553. Here's what it says. Listen closely. The only real freedom a human being can ever know is doing what you ought to do because you want to do it. Can you believe that? How beautiful is that? All our lives has been spent doing what we want to do instead of doing what we ought to do. Because doing what we ought to do was too hard. And you want to know why it was too hard? Because we did not want to do it. And that makes things really hard. And now this person has nailed it right on the head. The only real freedom that we will ever know is doing what we ought to do, doing what is right, what is good. And why do we do that? Listen to this. Because we want to do it. And the last paragraph in that chapter on page 553, he said, I get everything I need in Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything I need, I get. And when I get what I need, I find that it was just what I wanted all the time. May God bless you and keep you till we meet again. And I would be honored if you would continue to allow me to trudge this road with you.
Thanks for listening to The Recovery Effect with Bill Vineyard. Check out more at therecoveryeffect.com and facebook.com/therecoveryeffect. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes.